Hi everyone, welcome back to this series. In the last part of this series, we started setting up our React project. We added some basic pages and added basic routing, but besides that, not much is happening. Time to change that and time to start working on our user interface. So right now what we have is this boring h1 tag for every page we visit. Now, how about the navigation bar at the top? That sounds like a good idea to start, right? So that's exactly what we'll do in this video and a little bit more as well. So let's start building some React components. As mentioned in the last part of this series, basic React knowledge is required. Dive into the official docs or take my complete guide to get that basic knowledge. In the source folder of my frontend, I will now add a new folder which I name components, and that is where I will store all my regular components. Now, regarding that file structure, you could use a different file structure. For example, you could also use a by feature structure where you don't have pages and components, but you have auth, bookings, events, and then you have subcomponents, the pages and the other components that belong to a feature in that subfolder. I will go for that structure right now. Now, in components, I want to have a navigation bar. So I will add a new subfolder in there, and I will name it navigation. And in there, I will add my main navigation.js file. Now, here again, I will create a normal React component. This time, however, not a class-based one, not a stateful one. By the way, of course, these components don't need to be stateful right now, but we will add logic that requires state in the future. Here, however, I'm very unlikely to need state. So what I will do in my navigation here actually is I will import React from React and then create a functional component. So I will create a new const here, name that main navigation. You could start with a capital M, I as a convention, name it in a camel case. Here inside of that file, we only need to have Pascal case in the files where we then start using this as a component. And there, this is a function, it's a functional component. We get props here, that is how functional components work in React. And then we have the function body where we need to return some JSX. And if all you're doing is return some JSX, you can use the shorthand notation for the arrow function and instantly return some JSX, like a h1 tag, the navbar. And then you can export this function as the default for this file. Now, this is one single expression, and so is it the case if I wrap this in a div, for example. But of course, this gets harder to read the more and more elements we add, even if it's all wrapped by one element. And therefore, one notation you often see is that you wrap this in normal brackets, and then you can write multi-line code here, even though it's still technically only one expression, but it's easier to read. Now, I don't want to wrap this in a div, though. I will wrap it in a header. And in that header, I want to have a couple of different areas. And here I will add a div, and that will get a CSS class. And in React, you have to use class name here, which will be my main navigation logo using some BEM style naming here or class naming. And I will not name this the navbar, but let's come up with some fancy name for our app. Could be easy event or whatever you like. Then I also want to have my navigation items, and I want to have them on the right. And for that, I will reserve a different div with a class name of main navigation items, for example. And in there, I want to have an unordered list. And since that will be navigation items, I'll actually convert this from a div to a nav element. And there I'll have an unordered list with a couple of list items. And each list item should be a link to the different pages we have here. And I could use an anchor tag, but to catch any clicks on that and prevent a real request from being sent and therefore the page reloading, I will instead import something from React router DOM, and that something here is the link, or there is a special form, the nav link component. And that will render a normal anchor tag in the end, but when we click on it, it will catch the click and prevent the default, which would be that the browser sends a request and hence reloads the page. And it will not reload the page, and instead analyze the click, basically analyze to which path you want it to go, manually update the URL to reflect that, and manually render the right page for you so that you don't leave that single page application illusion, so that you don't reload the page, but you stay in your currently rendered application. Therefore, in this list item, I'll use navlink. And the difference between navlink and link basically is that navlinks get an extra CSS class rendered when they are active. So when the path you are on matches the path the link points to, so that you can style them differently. And here that navlink needs a to property. And let's say here we have one that leads to /events, and the text will be events. And we have another list item, and there we have bookings, and we can go to our bookings. We could also add one to authentication. So let's maybe duplicate this and up there have auth, and there write authenticate, something like that. Now a bit restructured thanks to auto formatting. This is how our navigation could look like. It will have no styling right now, but this is how it can look like from a structural perspective. Now, since we already exported, we can start using it. And I want to use it on every page here, on the auth page, the bookings page, the events page, because the main navigation bar should always be the same. To do that, we can, of course, simply go back to app.js, which is a wrapper around all these components. And here I can import my main navigation from, and then go to components, navigation, main navigation. And please also note that this navigation will have no styling at all, and therefore right now it will also not be responsive. It will not even look good on desktop devices. It's just unstyled. Now I have this main navigation component, and here you have to use Pascal case, by the way. You can name this however you want. It doesn't have to be the name you chose here, because you export this as a default, but it has to be Pascal case so that you can use it as a component in JSX. And now I want to use it here around my switch statement, main navigation. I will use, or not around it, but on top of it, so that I have the navigation at the top with the links. So inside of the browser router, because the nav links are provided by that React router package, but above the place where the content will then be rendered. We could also put that content into a main component, a main element. That is a normal HTML element, and it's totally optional as well. You don't need that, but I like this from a semantic perspective. If I do that and I save everything and I go back, I get an error here. Yeah, and the problem is that I may only have one child element here. Browser router is not okay with having two sibling elements as children. And to work around that, we can use a component built into React, React.fragment, which is basically an empty shell, you could say. It does not render a real HTML element, but it fulfills that requirement of being a wrapper, even though it's invisible, so to say. So I wrap React fragment around my navigation and the main element. And now this reloads, and this is my unstyled navigation bar. Doesn't look much like a bar, I know, but it will be. And these are my links. And actually, if you click on them, you see they work. And the interesting thing, which can be hard to spot at first, is that this page never reloads. Watch that reload icon. When I click around here, this never spins. Now, you can see the difference if you replace one of these links, let's say the events link temporarily, with a normal anchor tag, which leads to /events. Like this. If I do that using a normal anchor tag, then you see no difference here. It looks the same. And authenticated bookings works as before, but watch the reload icon here when I click on events. You see? That spins, and you can clearly see that the page reloads when I click on it. Not for authenticated bookings, but clearly for events. And that's the idea of, or behind not using that anchor tag, but using that nav link, because that prevents this and keeps us in the already running application, which is a much nicer user experience, of course. Okay, so this is the unstyled navigation. Now it's time to add some styling, and for that I'll add a new file here, main navigation.css, and I will import that styling file here in main navigation.js. You can do that. The Create React app tool gives you a project that is capable of importing CSS into JavaScript. So to say, it does not really import it, but it uses Webpack behind the scenes, which is a tool which sees that import and which then takes your CSS code and injects it into the final page for you. So it's just a convenient way of adding CSS, you could say. The CSS code here is not scoped to this component, by the way. It's still imported as global CSS if you do it like that. And now we can still write CSS code that would style every or any element on the page. But of course, thanks to me using BEM class names, I can use these class names to make sure I only style the parts I want to style. So I will also give my header a class name of main navigation here, so that I can target the header itself, then have a way of targeting the logo wrapper, and I have a way of targeting my navigation items. So in here, we can now target main navigation, which is the entire header. And I want to have that fixed to the top. And now this is some CSS code. Again, as always, I have a course for that. If you want to learn more about that, take my CSS to Complete guide. It's a great course which takes you from CSS novice to advanced CSS user, or as always, take free resources. The idea behind my courses obviously is that I give you all the knowledge in my opinion, well-presented and optimal way. But no need to buy them if you don't want to. You can take free resources as well. I just assume some basic CSS knowledge here. I will not walk through every tiny behavior and every property we add. So here I will set the entire header to a fixed position in the top left corner with these two properties. I want to take the entire width and I will give this a height in rem of, let's say, 3.5 rem. That should be fine. And I will give it a background color of, let's start with orange and then pick a nice color here. I will probably refine that. Don't know what looks good. Maybe this orangish color here. We'll see. Let's go with that for now. Or let's actually maybe go more into the bluish area here. Something like that. So this is my background color here. And I will give it some padding. 0 to top and bottom, but let's say 1 rem to left and right. And if we now save that, we should already see the first change. This is my header styling. It does not give the background color to the entire header content because I restrict the height here. And now my goal, of course, is to position all the header children inside of that header. For that, I will use flexbox here. So display flex. And that already makes a difference the moment I add it. Now you see these items jump to the right of my logo. And now I also want to target main navigation logo. So that's the div around my h1 tag. And I want to target that h1 tag in there to be very precise. And I will remove the margin from there. And I will also set the font size to 1.5 rem only. And now this looks like that. But I want to position it in a vertical center. And with Flexbox, that's really easy. On the wrapping element, so the main navigation header here, I just have to set align items to center here. And what this does is that it aligns items on the center on the so-called cross axis. The main axis here is from left to right by default. The cross axis is from top to bottom, therefore, and it aligns all the items in the center of that cross axis. Now, obviously, my items here, the navigation items, should also be positioned next to each other without bullet points. And therefore, I will now target my main navigation items, that should be items, here, which is the unordered list. And there, I will remove any margin we have and remove any padding we have. And also set the list style to none here. And on the margin, I will remove it almost. I want to remove it on the top. I want to remove it on the right and on the bottom. But to the left, I actually want to have, let's say, 1.5 rem to have some spacing to the logo. And now with that, oops, here's an extra semicolon. If we save that, it looks like that. Now, I want to position the items next to each other, as I said. We have to keep in mind that main navigation items is only a wrapper around the unordered list. So now I need to select that unordered list in there. And I will turn this into a flexbox 2, into a flex container 2 with display flex. And therefore, by the way, I need list style none on this here. And the padding should also be reset there. And the margin can actually be 0 in all directions here. And up there, which was just a nav, so tiny mistake on my side, I just want to have some margin left, so that will do entirely. For a moment, I thought that this was added to the unordered list, but it was not. It was the nav item, which has no default stylings, so no need to reset the padding. For the unordered list, I do need to do that, however, and I do set the display to flex. And with that, if we save that, the items are already aligned next to each other, thanks to Flexbox. Obviously, would be nice to have a little bit different stylings here and a little bit more spacing. So on my main navigation items, I will select the individual list item elements, and I will give these a margin of 0 top to bottom, or a top and bottom. But left and right, I will give these, let's say, 1 rem. And then I'll also select main navigation items, any anchor tags in there, and keep in mind that navlink will render an anchor tag in the end. So I do select my navlinks with that. You can't select JSX elements in CSS anyways, by the way. You have to select the HTML elements, the JSX renders in the end. So here I select the anchor tags, and I will remove the text decoration there. And let's give them some text color. Let's also start from orange again. Now I chose this bluish color here. Maybe something like this can be used as a contrast for the links then. Maybe a little bit more to the white color. It's not super good to see. Let's make this totally white actually and give it a hover color of yellow when we hover over it. We could also go with black here, by the way. Might be even easier to see. And now let's add main navigation's eye anchor tags we are hovering over, or any anchor tags which are active, which is the case when we just touch them or when we have them clicked and we haven't released the mouse button yet. And there I want to give them a color. Well, let's go with yellow there. Maybe a yellow like this, something like that. Yeah, that should do. We can clearly read everything, and when we hover over it, we can just see it gets activated. Obviously, you can pick other styles there. I'm just making them up as I write this code, but that should be okay for now. Now, that is my navigation. What we can see is that the content that is actually rendered is below that navigation. The reason for that is that I have position fixed here on the main navigation, and therefore it's just positioned in the top left corner of this page, and it doesn't, it's not added to the normal document flow. And therefore the other elements which are rendered on the page don't take care about that main navigation. Now I want to keep it fixed, and therefore I will solve this by giving this main element here some margin to the top essentially. So here, I will give this a class of, let's say, main content. You can name this class however you want. We already import app CSS here. So in app CSS, I can now style main content. And there, I will give this a margin to the top of at least the height of my header, which is 3.5 rem. But I will actually go with 4 rem to have some additional spacing. And I also want to have some margin to left and right. So let's actually change this to margin. Top is 4 rem. And then we have left and right of, let's say, 2.5 rem. And bottom is also 4 rem because I don't set a separate value. And now we can clearly see the events page here. And if I switch around, you see that it's positioned correctly for every page. Now, what we don't see is the page we're on is not marked as active here in the navigation. Now, if we inspect that, however, here in the developer tools, you see I'm on /auth, and actually this anchor tag has a class, a CSS class of active. And that is a CSS class which is added automatically by that nav link component we are using here. So what we know is whichever page is active will have the active CSS class. Now obviously we can use that for styling then. So I want to apply my highlighted style here, not only when we hover over it or when it is active in the sense of we're clicking on it, but also when it has this active class. With a.active, we say whenever an anchor tag has the active class, it should get that color. And now you see that is yellow. Now, obviously, you can change the stylings to your likings if you prefer different stylings. Now, it's still not responsive, of course. You see, if we preview this on a mobile device, let me increase it a little bit. You can clearly see the navigation just gets cut off, and this is obviously not the layout we want to have on a mobile view. There we would like to have some hamburger button and a sliding side menu. Now that is something I'll not take care about for now, right now. I do have a video, by the way, where I do build just something like that, responsive navigation with React. So definitely check that out if you want to implement it on your own immediately. Link is in the video description. For now, we'll go with that so that we can move on with the other features and with the other parts of the app. Like, for example, here, some meat, some content for our pages, or to start with, at least, for our authentication page.